The bells of the cathedral tolled like iron chains on her heart. Each toll was another reminder that her freedom was slipping away, another nail sealing the coffin of the life she had never chosen. Princess Alara stood at the edge of the great hall, veiled in white satin and pearls, while courtiers whispered about the splendor of her wedding day. To them, it was a triumph of politics, a merging of kingdoms, a spectacle that would be sung for centuries. But to her, it was a funeral, her own. She could hardly breathe beneath the weight of the gown, stitched with golden thread that glimmered under the torchlight. The jewels at her throat felt like shackles. Beyond the altar stood her groom, a man she scarcely knew, a prince whose smile was as sharp as the blade he wore at his side. He bowed to the crowd with ease, but when his eyes fell on her, there was no warmth, only possession. The king, her father, sat proud in his throne. He had made this match not for love, but for land, for treaties, for strength that would outlast his reign. Alara knew he believed he was doing his duty as ruler, yet in his eyes she was not a daughter. She was coin. The incense grew thick, the hymns swelled louder, and the priest raised his hand to begin the binding words. And in that moment, when the hall's attention shifted heavenward, Alara's heart beat with a clarity she had not felt before. If she stayed, she would be lost, forever. If she fled, she would risk everything. The decision came like lightning. She turned. The gasps rose like a tide as she swept down the aisle, skirts tearing against marble, guards calling after her in confusion. A lady of the court cried her name, but Alara did not look back. Through corridors she ran, down stairwells where the dust of centuries clung to the air, her slippered feet striking stone. Behind her came the thunder of boots, the cry of alarm. Her veil tore away in the wind as she burst through a servant's passage and into the night. The cold air seared her lungs, but freedom burned brighter. The moon was high, casting silver, light across the castle walls. Horses neighed in alarm as she darted past the stables, but she dared not stop. Out the gates, through the shadows of the sleeping town, she fled. The gown dragged against the earth, heavy with mud and dew, but she clutched it up in her hands and ran. The cobbled streets gave way to dirt paths, and dirt paths to the wild edges of the forest. Owls stirred from branches as she passed. Her heart pounded with terror, but also with something dangerously close to joy. She had no plan, no map, no ally. Only the fierce need to escape the prison built for her in silk and gold. By dawn, her body trembled with exhaustion. The hem of her gown was ragged, her bare feet blistered and torn where shoes had long since been abandoned. Hunger clawed at her stomach, thirst burned her throat. The cries of the guards had faded hours ago, but she dared not believe she was safe. The king's men would comb every road, every village, every wood. When the first smoke rose in the distance, she stumbled toward it. A forge, its chimney coughing black into the morning sky. The clang of hammer on anvil rang out steady and sure. A blacksmith's shop, humble but alive, standing at the edge of the woods. She staggered closer, the scent of ash and molten iron filling her lungs. Her vision blurred, her knees weakened. She reached the wooden barn beside the forge and collapsed against the door. It creaked open beneath her weight, spilling her into the darkness within. The barn was warm, filled with the scent of hay and soot. Horses shifted softly in their stalls. Tools gleamed faintly in the dim light. Alara dragged herself to a corner, burying her torn gown in straw, and pressed her back against the wall. For the first time since she had fled, she allowed her eyes to close. The clanging ceased outside. She heard footsteps crunch against gravel, then the barn door creaked again. A figure stepped in, broad-shouldered, arms dusted with soot, hair damp with sweat. His presence filled the space, yet his steps were careful, as though he sensed something was out of place. Alara held her breath, praying the shadows would keep her hidden. But then he bent to place a bucket of water on the ground, and the chain around his neck swung forward. It caught the light. Gleaming gold, carved with a crest she knew too well, her family's crest. Her heart froze. Why would a blacksmith, a common man in ash-stained clothes, wear the emblem of her house? Why would he keep it close to his heart, as though it meant more to him than his own name? Ilara's world, already unmoored, tilted further into the unknown. And as her eyes fluttered closed from exhaustion, one thought burned brighter than fear. This was no ordinary refuge. Fate had carried her to a man who was bound, somehow, to her destiny. Morning light spilled through the cracks in the barn wall, soft and golden, carrying the scent of hay and warm earth. Ilara stirred from her shallow sleep, her body aching from the cold ground. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The veil of exhaustion made her believe she was still in her chambers, wrapped in silk sheets, a servant ready with water and honeyed bread. But the ache in her feet reminded her. The torn gown clinging to her skin reminded her. The heavy silence of the barn, broken only by the soft whicker of horses, reminded her. She sat upright, heart quickening. The events of the night came rushing back. The flight from the cathedral, the forest, the barn door opening, and the glimpse of that chain, that crest glinting against the chest of the blacksmith. Her eyes darted to the shadows. The barn was empty. Only the rhythm of the forge outside reached her, the steady hammer striking iron, a sound that seemed to carry both danger and safety. Ilara's mouth was dry, her body trembling with thirst. She crept toward the bucket she had seen him place near the door. The water inside was cool and fresh, meant perhaps for the horses, but in that moment it was salvation. She cupped her hands, drinking until her belly ached with relief. When she raised her head, the barn door stood half open. Beyond it, she could see the man at his work. The blacksmith. He moved like a creature born of fire and metal. His arms swung, the hammer in perfect rhythm, each strike sending sparks into the air. His back glistened with sweat, his shirt clinging to a frame hardened by years of toil. The forge bathed him in light, outlining his body in amber, as though he were a figure shaped from the earth itself. But Ilara's eyes were not drawn to the hammer, nor the fire. They were drawn to his chest, to the chain that swung with every strike. The crest of her house gleamed there still, catching the sun. She pressed a hand to her lips. It was no trinket stolen by chance, no coin tossed away from a noble's pocket. No commoner would dare keep such a thing, much less wear it, openly. That crest belonged to the bloodline of the crown. Her breath caught. Could he be a deserter from her father's guard, a thief who robbed a noble, or something deeper, something tied to the shadows of her family's past? Her mind spun, yet her body swayed with weakness. She needed food, rest, but most of all, she needed to remain unseen. If the blacksmith discovered her, he might hand her over to the king's men, and she would be dragged back to the cage she had escaped. But as if summoned by her very thought, the hammering ceased. Silence fell, heavy and sudden. She froze where she crouched, eyes fixed on the door. A moment later, he stepped inside. His presence filled the barn once more, larger than the space seemed to allow. He carried with him the smell of smoke and steel, his hands rough, his eyes dark as the iron he shaped. He paused when he saw her, his gaze cutting through the shadows. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. Ilara rose, though her knees trembled. Pride, drilled into her since childhood, would not let her cower. She drew her ragged gown tighter, lifting her chin despite the mud and tears that stained her. The blacksmith's eyes narrowed, not with malice, but with a guarded curiosity. His hand went to the chain at his chest as though to steady it. The crest flashed once more in the light. "Why do you wear that?" Her voice was hoarse, yet steady. He studied her in silence, as if weighing whether she was real or some fever, dream brought by the forge's heat. At last he stepped closer, slow and deliberate, like one approaching a wild creature that might bolt at the slightest sound. "This ring," he said at last, his voice low, roughened by smoke and solitude, "was given to me as a boy. I have kept it all my life." Ilara's heart jolted. A ring. She thought of the chain. It was not merely a crest. It was a golden circlet, small enough for a child's hand, engraved with the emblem of her family. Her mother's ring. The memory struck her with sudden force. She had seen it once, long ago in her mother's jewelry chest, a delicate band of gold, etched with vines and crowned with her house's sigil. Her mother had worn it in her youth, before illness took her beauty and her life. Afterward, the ring had vanished. The servants whispered it had been stolen, but her father never spoke of it, and here it was, resting against the chest of a stranger. Her throat tightened. That ring. It belongs to the royal house. The blacksmith met her gaze, his expression unreadable. It belongs to me. The words hung heavy in the air, bold as defiance, quiet as truth. Alara felt the ground tilt beneath her. Who was this man, this blacksmith with fire in his hands and her family's crest at his heart? But before she could demand more, the sound of hooves shattered the silence. From beyond the barn, voices carried, rough, commanding, the language of soldiers. The king's men. Alara's blood ran cold. They had come. The blacksmith's eyes flicked to the door, then back to her. He did not move, but his jaw tightened, and in his gaze she saw it. Recognition. He knew who she was. And in that instant, her fate hung in his hands. The voices outside grew louder, commanding, sharp, the kind of voices that had filled Alara's childhood with dread. They were soldiers of her father's crown, men sworn to find her, drag her back to the cathedral, and restore the honor she had so violently torn away. The blacksmith's gaze lingered on her, heavy with unspoken thoughts. In the flicker of that moment, Alara felt the terrible truth. He recognized her. There was no mistaking the tilt of his head, the way his eyes sharpened with the kind of recognition that came not from seeing her in the light of gossip or portrait, but from something deeper. He stepped past her to the door of the barn. Through a crack in the wood, he peered outside. Horses snorted, armor clinked, and men barked orders as they spread through the village. "They're searching every home," he said, his voice low, edged with thought. "They'll come here soon." Alara's blood ran cold. She stumbled too, her feet clutching the tattered folds of her gown. "If they find me?" "They won't," he cut in. His tone was flat, certain. She stared at him. "Why should I trust you?" He turned back to her, the firelight from the forge beyond outlining his face. His eyes, dark and solemn, did not flinch. "Because your life is bound to mine, princess. In ways you do not yet understand." The word struck her like a blow. She opened her mouth to demand answers, but he was already moving, pulling an old woolen cloak from a hook and thrusting it into her hands. "Cover yourself, quickly." With trembling fingers, she obeyed, wrapping the coarse fabric around her torn gown. The heavy wool swallowed her in its folds, dulling the brilliance of her silks until she looked less like a runaway bride and more like a weary traveler. The barn doors burst open. 2 soldiers strode inside, faces hard beneath steel helmets. Their eyes swept over the stalls, the hay, the tools. "You there," one barked, addressing the blacksmith. "The king's daughter has fled. We've been ordered to search every house, every barn. Have you seen a woman pass this way? She would be young, dressed for a wedding." Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. She kept her face low beneath the hood, every muscle aching with the effort not to flinch. The blacksmith's expression was calm, almost bored, as he wiped his hands on a rag. "I've seen no princess, only horses and iron. If you want, you can search." The soldier narrowed his eyes, stepping closer. His gaze drifted toward Alara. For a moment, her breath caught. She could feel the weight of his suspicion, the sharp edge of his attention. The blacksmith moved then, stepping deliberately into the soldier's line of sight. He placed a hand on the glowing iron bar he had been shaping, and the forge hissed. The soldier flinched back slightly at the sudden heat. "This is dangerous work," the blacksmith said, his tone low but steady. "Stay too long, and you'll leave with burns instead of answers. Now, will you search, or will you move on?" The soldier's lip curled, but his companion tugged at his sleeve. "Come on, we've wasted enough time here." With a final scowl, they turned and left, their boots striking the earth outside. The sound of their horses receded into the distance. Alara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her legs nearly gave way beneath her. The blacksmith turned back to her, and for the first time there was something in his eyes that was not guardedness, but recognition tinged with sorrow. He touched the chain at his chest, drawing out the golden ring. The crest glowed faintly in the dim light, its engraving catching her eye once more. "You asked why I wear this," he said quietly. "It is not stolen nor bought. It was given to me by your mother." Alara's breath caught. "That's impossible. My mother was a queen," he finished for her, "and a queen does not walk the world as others do. But once, long before you were born, she saved a child. An orphan, left with nothing but hunger and fear. She pressed this ring into his palm and told him to keep it, to remember that mercy and kindness could still be found in the world. That boy grew into the man you see before you." The barn seemed to tilt around her. The air grew thick. She pressed a hand to the wall for balance, her mind spinning with the weight of his words. "You." Her throat tightened. "You are that boy?" The blacksmith nodded once. "I owed her my life, and though she is gone, I have never forgotten. Every blow of my hammer, every day of my toil, I carried this as a reminder of the promise I made, that one day, if her blood ever needed me, I would not turn away." Ilara's eyes burned with sudden tears. Memories of her mother, soft hands, gentle songs, rose like ghosts from her childhood. Her mother had been kind in ways her father never understood, her heart open to the lowly as well as the high, and now here stood the living proof of that kindness, a man shaped by her gift, standing as shield between Ilara and her father's soldiers. "I don't even know your name," she whispered. "Kyle," he said simply. "Kale of the Forge." Nothing more, but to her, it was not nothing. It was everything. Silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken things. At last, Kyle broke it. "They will not stop searching, and sooner or later, they will come again. You cannot remain here." Her chest tightened. "Then where can I go?" He studied her for a long moment, his jaw set, his eyes unreadable. "There are places in the mountains, villages beyond the king's reach. I can take you there, but it will mean leaving everything behind. Your title, your crown, your past." Ilara's breath trembled. The crown had been her cage, the title, her chains, but to cast them away forever, to vanish as though she had never been. Her heart wavered, torn between fear and yearning. Kale's hand lingered on the ring at his chest. "The choice is yours, princess, but if you stay, they will find you, and they will not forgive you." The barn was silent, but for the soft breath of the horses and the faint hiss of cooling iron. Outside, the kingdom hunted for its runaway bride. Inside, a blacksmith who carried her mother's gift waited for her answer. And for the first time in her life, Ilara realized her fate lay not in the hands of her father, nor her crown, nor even the men who hunted her. It lay in her own. The morning. Sun rose pale over the forge, casting the barn in long golden beams. Ilara stood wrapped in the coarse cloak Kale had given her, staring at the path that wound away from the village. Her body was weary, but her mind was a storm. The thought of leaving everything she had known, the palace, the court, even the memory of her mother's gardens, felt like tearing flesh from bone. Yet what waited for her if she returned? A loveless union, a gilded prison, a life lived as a bargaining chip. Kyle busied himself with preparations, his movements swift but measured. He saddled a sturdy horse, packed provisions into saddlebags, hard bread, cured meat, flasks of water, and tied bundles of cloth around iron tools that could serve as weapons if needed. Every action was purposeful, forged in silence, as though he had spent a lifetime preparing for this very moment. At last, he turned to her. "We must leave before the sun is high. The soldiers will circle back." Ilara hesitated, her fingers curling into the cloak. "If they catch us, they won't," Kyle said firmly. "I know these woods better than they do. I was raised in their shadows. Trust me, princess." Her heart jolted at the word, princess. Once it had been her identity, now it felt like a noose. She wanted to tell him not to call her that, to strip the title away as she longed to strip away the life it represented, but the words stuck in her throat. So she mounted the horse and Cale took the reins, leading them away from the forge. The village fell behind, its smoke rising faint against the sky. Ahead stretched the wilderness, winding paths, thick woods, and hills that rolled into the horizon. The forest swallowed them whole, its canopy dappling them in shadow. Birds flitted overhead, deer scattered at their passing, and the air grew cooler beneath the trees. Ilara clung to the saddle, her muscles aching, her gown snagging on branches despite the cloak. Yet with every mile they put between themselves and the castle, her chest eased. The further they went, the lighter she felt, as though with each step she shed another chain from her body. Cale rode with steady purpose, his eyes scanning the trees, always alert. He spoke little, but his silence did not feel cold. It felt like a shield, broad, unyielding, carrying her forward. By dusk, they reached a clearing where a stream sang over stones. Cale dismounted, tethering the horse, and began to gather wood. Ilara knelt by the water, cupping it in her hands, the chill biting her skin. Her reflection wavered in the current, pale and unfamiliar. Not the adorned bride of yesterday, nor the princess the kingdom sought. Just a woman, stripped bare of titles, staring into the unknown. When Cale lit the fire, its warmth bathed them in amber glow. They shared bread in silence, broken only by the crackle of flames. At last, Ilara spoke. "Do you regret it?" Cale looked up. "Regret what?" "Carrying that ring, carrying her gift." She nodded toward the chain at his chest. "It bound you to a promise you could not have known would shape your life. To me, to this." He considered her words, gaze lingering on the fire. "No, the promise gave me purpose. It reminded me I was more than an orphan of war, more than calloused hands and soot. It reminded me that even in the lowest ashes, kindness can strike like a spark. If carrying it has brought me here, then I regret nothing." Her throat tightened. She turned her gaze to the flames, but the warmth that burned her cheeks was not from the fire. They spoke no more that night. But as she lay wrapped in the cloak upon the earth, she felt Cale's presence near her, steady as the heartbeat of the ground. And for the first time since her flight, she slept without fear. The following days blurred into a rhythm of travel. Dawn would find them breaking camp, riding through tangled forests and over rivers that glittered like silver. Noon brought brief rests, where Cale would hunt small game or mend their gear, his hands never idle. At night, they shared meager meals by the fire, their silences growing less guarded, their words more free. Ilara found herself watching him when he did not notice, how his hands, roughened by labor, handled each task with a strange gentleness, how his eyes, so dark and serious, softened when he looked at her. She found herself laughing once, startled by the sound of it, when he told her of the goat in the village that terrorized even the bravest dogs. The laughter felt strange, yet healing, like a forgotten melody returning. But the world beyond their little fire did not rest. Twice they spotted riders in the distance, soldiers scouring the land. Once they hid in the hollow of an old oak, the thunder of hooves shaking the earth as men passed so near Ilara could see the glint of their spears. Another time, Cale led her through a river, their bodies numb with cold, to erase their trail from the trackers who followed. With each close escape, the danger grew sharper. Yet so too did the bond between them, forged in fire and fear and fleeting moments of quiet peace. On the fifth night, as the firelight danced, Ilara turned to him. "Kyle," she whispered, "if we reach those mountains, if we vanish beyond my father's reach, what then? Who will I be, if not a princess? What life is there for me?" Cale met her gaze, his face half shadow, half glow. "You will be who you choose. No throne, no crown, no father to dictate your fate. Only you." Her heart pounded, her breath caught. The words were simple, yet they struck deeper than any sermon or oath she had ever heard. But before she could Speak. The night shattered. The crack of a twig, the snort of horses. Kale's eyes hardened. He rose in an instant, dousing the fire with his boot. Darkness swallowed them, leaving only the pale glow of moonlight. Through the trees, torches flickered. Voices carried. Soldiers. Too close. Too many. Ilara's breath stilled. Kale's hand closed around her arm, firm, steady. Run. And together, they fled into the shadows, the forest swallowing them once more, the hunt closing in like a tightening noose. The forest swallowed their footsteps as Ilara and Kale ran, the night alive, with shouts and the pounding of hooves. Branches clawed at her cloak, roots snagged her skirts, but Kale's grip never faltered. He pulled her onward, faster, deeper into the thicket, his breath steady even as her lungs burned. Behind them, the glow of torches spread through the trees, soldiers scattering like wolves through the dark. Ilara's heart thundered, not from fear alone, but from the weight of all that would be lost if they were caught. At last, Kale veered off the path, dragging her down a rocky slope where the trees thickened. They crouched low, pressed against the earth, listening as riders passed overhead, their voices fading into the distance. Ilara clutched his arm, her body trembling. They will not stop. They will chase us until we are found. Kale's jaw tightened, his eyes like steel in the moonlight. Then we make our stand where they least expect it. By dawn, they had climbed into the foothills of the northern mountains, where jagged cliffs tore the sky and the land grew harsh and untamed. The kingdom's reach weakened here. Villages were scarce, the wilderness vast, but so too was the danger of being cornered. They found shelter in the ruins of an old watchtower, its stones half fallen, ivy creeping through its cracks. Kale built a small fire within the crumbling walls, careful to keep the smoke hidden. As the flames licked upward, Ilara traced her fingers over the weathered stone. She remembered the tapestries of her childhood, maps of her father's realm, marked with towers such as this, built long ago to keep out invaders. And now she was the invader, hunted within her own land. She turned to Kale, watching as he tightened the straps of his armor, if it could be called such. His leather jerkin was patched, his sword a blackened smith's blade rather than a knight's steel. Yet he carried himself with the gravity of a warrior, shoulders square, movements precise. "Kyle," she whispered, "you could leave me here. They seek me, not you. If you go now, you could vanish. Live free." His head snapped up, eyes fierce. "You think I would leave you to their mercy?" "No, Ilara. I swore, before I even knew your face, that I would protect you. That ring was not a token. It was a bond." Her throat closed, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. She wanted to tell him what it meant, that in all her life of silken promises and hollow vows, his words carried more weight than 100 royal oaths. But before she could, the distant echo of horns broke the air. The soldiers had found their trail. The hours that followed were a blur. They fought their way through the forest edge, Kyle's blade flashing in the sunlight as he struck against armored men. Ilara moved as he commanded, running when he urged, ducking when he shielded her. Her heart screamed with every clash of steel, every cry of pain. At one point, Kale staggered, a cut slicing across his arm. She rushed to his side, pressing her. Hands to the wound, but he only shook his head, grim and determined. "Not now. Keep moving." They broke through to a cliffside, the valley sprawling below. Soldiers closed in from behind, their banners snapping in the wind. The king's crest emblazoned upon them. Ilara's legs faltered. There was nowhere left to run. Kale stood before her, sword raised, his chest heaving. "Stay behind me." But as the soldiers formed their circle, another sound split the air, one she had not expected. Hooves thundered, not from the enemy's flank, but from the valley below. A band of riders surged upward, cloaked not in the king's colors, but in the rough garb of villagers, hunters, smiths. Men and women who had followed Kale's call, who had taken up arms not for crown or coin, but for freedom. At their head rode an elder with a weathered face, bow strung and eyes fierce. "For the blacksmith," he cried. "For the princess who chose her own fate." Chaos erupted. The king's soldiers faltered as the villagers struck from below, arrows whistling, blades clashing. Cale seized the moment, pulling Alara toward T. The melee, his voice sharp with urgency. "Stay close!" The battle roared around them, shouts, steel, the ring of arrows striking stone. Alara ducked and dodged, heart racing, every breath a prayer. Through it all, Cale fought like fire itself, unyielding, unbroken, each swing of his blade carving a path. And then, silence. The last of the soldiers fled down the slope, their banners trampled, their horns silenced. The villagers cheered, their voices echoing against the cliffs. Alara stood in the wreckage, her cloak torn, her body trembling, but she was alive. They both were. Cale lowered his sword, bloodied and battered, his chest heaving. He turned to her, and for a long moment neither spoke. Then Alara stepped forward, reaching for the chain around his neck. With trembling fingers, she lifted the ring that had bound their lives together. Her eyes met his. This was once a token of protection, but now, Cale, let it be more. And before the gathered crowd, before the mountains and the sky, she slid the ring from the chain and placed it upon her finger. The villagers erupted in cheers, but Alara heard nothing but the sound of Cale's breath, felt nothing but the warmth of his hands as he cupped hers. "You are no longer my princess," he whispered, voice breaking. "You are my heart." And in that ruined tower, beneath the endless sky, Alara chose, not crown, not throne, but love forged in fire and bound in freedom. Epilogue. Seasons turned. Word spread through the land of the runaway princess who vanished into the mountains, and of the blacksmith who stood at her side. Some called it betrayal, others called it legend. But in the villages, in the fields, in the hearts of those who had once bent to kings and lords, the story became something more. It was not the tale of a princess who fled her wedding, nor of a blacksmith who wore her ring. It was the tale of two souls who defied the chains of destiny and forged their own.